And so this next poem, Adam's Curse by William Butler Yeats, an Irish poet, is a text about the nature of poetry and conversation, relationships and wisdom. It is a poem that is set on a late summer evening in conversation between a group of friends. In my house, there is no third adult, but my wife Ilana is here to discuss this poem in the context in which it is set. Ilana, thanks for joining us.
It's wonderful to be here.
Ilana, take us through this poem as a lover of poetry, a lifelong reader. How do you approach a poem like this, and what does it say to you about language, about poetry, about those topics that I just mentioned?
Well, I think very often when you're reading a poem, certainly when you read it for the first time, your initial reaction is just to be struck by the beauty of the poem, and that reaction to the beauty comes even before any sort of intellectual understanding. That is to say, you may have no idea what the poem is about or what its message is, but you know that you read it and it has an effect on you. You've seen something, you've encountered an object of beauty. So that's sort of my initial reaction to this poem.
Where's that registered in the text? Where do you elicit? Is that a response to every poem? Is that something that is triggered by this text?
Certainly not every poem, but in this poem, where the word beauty is a key term in the poem, right? The beautiful, mild woman is one of the interlocutors, one of the speakers in this poem, right? Beauty is very much at stake in the discussion about poetry that they're having, right? He refers to this woman on multiple occasions as that beautiful, mild woman, and the poem ends with, I had a thought for no one's but your ears that you were beautiful. Okay, we've already been told that in the poem multiple times. You need to tell us that again. Beauty is key here, right? Poetry has to be about beauty. If it's about nothing else, it has to be about beauty. That's the effect poetry is meant to have on us. We're supposed to recognize we've encountered a thing of beauty. But what we're told here in this poem is that beauty, which we can apprehend so immediately, is actually for the poet an intense labor. The poet has to work very, very hard to get to have that effect on us. It's not just like, splashing some paint across a canvas and, oh wow, what a gorgeous work of art, right? There's a lot, it may look like that to us, but there's a lot of work that goes into that. And that's Adam's curse. Because what is Adam's curse? Adam was cursed in the Garden of Eden, right? According to the Genesis story, that Adam was going to have to labor. Adam was going to have to work very, very hard in order to have food, right? By the sweat of your brow, you shall have bread, Adam is told. That's the curse, right? You're not going to just be able to pluck fruit off a tree or to just spout out a beautiful poem and there it is, beauty right there. No, beauty takes work. And that's the curse of the poem, that writing a poem is as difficult as all the other labors the poet enumerates in the first stanza of the poem.
Mm-hmm. Is there a contradiction there between labor and beauty?
Only if you don't appreciate the process, right? If you just want to see the finished product, then you assume that beauty is something that's so effortlessly gained, right? It's like, oh, you look at the flowers outside and they're just beautiful, as if they were always beautiful and always there, and no one had to work to plant them and to water them and to weed the garden, right? When you look at that thing of beauty, you're not thinking about that process. But when you get behind the scenes with a garden, as with a poem, you realize, wow, there's a lot of work that goes into that. What is that work? Well, it's no different from getting down on your marrow bones, from going down on your hands and knees and scrubbing a kitchen pavement, or breaking stones, right? Or what are the other ones, right? It's like it's back-breaking labor, except you're not breaking your back, you're breaking your brain, right? But breaking your back and breaking your brain are not all that different, right? You're working very, very hard in order to come up with that poem. It's a craft. It's a craft like other crafts. And it requires, oh, that's the other thing. The thing with a poem is a lot of the work that you do in crafting a poem is not evident, right, by the end, because what do you do when you write a poem? You do a lot of deleting. You type, and then you say, oh, that line, no good, delete. You type, delete. And the way you get to the final poem is through endless, countless numbers of deletions, right? Revisions. And that's exactly what Yeats is saying, right? A line will take us hours, maybe. It can take hours to write one line of poetry, maybe even this very line that Yeats is talking about. Yet, if it does not seem a moment's thought, if it doesn't seem like something you could come up with in just a minute, as if it just came off effortlessly, if it doesn't look effortless, our stitching and unstitching has been naught. Then all that stitching and unstitching, stitching and unstitching, in other words, writing, deleting, if it doesn't look effortless, it's not worth it. And the analogy, should I go on? Or to beauty?
Yeah, let's talk about also that next stanza.
Okay, so who's this beautiful mild woman? Well, the idea is this woman hears these poets say that this, it has to look effortless, and she says, well, that reminds me of my makeup regimen. That's essentially what she's saying, right? She says, you don't agree? She's saying, okay, it's true that you have to work really, really hard, and a poem has to look effortless, but the same is true of beauty, right? Women, to be born a woman is to know, although they do not talk of it at school, that one must labor to be beautiful. What is the labor of a woman? A woman has to put so much work into looking as if she just rolled out of bed and landed in a glossy magazine, right? Mm-hmm. No woman in a glossy magazine just rolled out of bed, but if you knew all the work she put into, I don't know, buying her makeup and losing all the weight and staying fit and not eating this and eating that and blah, 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 and this tan and this beach, if you knew all that work, I don't know what the beauty would, I don't know what it would amount to. The point is that it looks effortless.
So you're saying that you see her statement as one of
identification with what the poet is saying,
mm-hmm.
And analogizing to her own experience, saying, oh yeah, I get that. Your curse as a poet is that you have to stitch and unstitch and put all this work into making your poet look effortless. My curse as a woman is not all that different. I must labor to be beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is an affinity between
mm-hmm.
that. I always read this as a kind of mocking acknowledgement. Oh, you gentlemen, you young men, you energetic, ambitious young poets you think you've come up with some grand idea. All women know this. This is something that what you think is a privileged piece of information, of knowledge that you have generated through your poetic craft. This is something that is democratic among women, and all women
That's
seem to
very
know.
nice.
It's almost like mocking
right.
his
Well,
privilege.
I see that in that she says to be born a woman is to know. Right? As in, I've known this my whole life. I've known this since birth. This insight that you had to come to, women were born knowing this.
And then we'll talk about this amongst ourselves in the conversation that will follow this in just a few minutes. But the male speakers cannot even seem to tolerate that statement. They shut her down, and that's all she was really allowed to say. After that, the speaker of the poem professes, well, I know this too, even though I'm not born a woman. I know this, and how do I know this? Well, that's my question to you. Right. How does he seem to know this? Mm-hmm. Anything else? Because I'm not being a man.
Well,
but
I think the other aspect of poetry that comes through here is the idea that society doesn't always appreciate the poet and often scorns the mm-hmm. poet or dismisses the poet or sees the poet's labor as less valuable. And
this was over 100 years ago, right. Writing this. He's saying the low social significance, the meager privilege. It's something scorned in society, even in Dublin in the first years of the 20th century.
And you see that at the end of the first stanza, right? I think most explicitly, for to articulate sweet sounds together, to write poetry, to come up with sweet sounds, is to work harder than all these, right? Mm-hmm. Is to work harder than the laborer, the person scrubbing the pavement, the pauper, right? All those people we listed before. And yet be thought an idler by the noisy set of bankers, schoolmasters, and clergymen, the martyrs call the world. Everyone else thinks, who are the real workers? The bankers, the clergymen, the people who are like getting up and getting dressed and going to work every day. You poets who just like wake up in the morning, make your tea, smoke your cigars, kick up your feet, and wait for the muse to come. You think that's work? Come on, right?
Right into your goldfish, as Billy Collins said.
Right. There's a sense of the sense of the tremendous dismissal of the poet as being an idler, as being a batlan, as being someone who doesn't do anything of value.
Mm-hmm. So that's another reason why we're reading this now, early in the semester, to understand that this is a part of our heritage as readers and writers of poetry, mm-hmm. this kind of dismay. Mm-hmm. And the woman is part of that underclass here. In her sense of affinity, identification with the poet, she too is part of the scorned class of humanity.
And I would say also, I'm not sure what's happening at the end of the poem with that sunset, the last embers of daylight die, but part of what I'm wondering to myself is, a sunset is almost like the prototype of the beautiful thing, right? Like when you want to describe beauty, what do you think? You think it's beautiful like a sunset. A sunset is something that always feels beautiful. And yet a sunset, how does God pull that off? Right? Or how does nature pull that off, right? How does the sunset just happen? It looks so effortless, right? As if it just is happening naturally. And part of what the poet is trying to do, perhaps, is to replicate what seems effortless in nature. The flower just seems so beautiful, as if it were always beautiful. The sunset, it looks like nothing had to happen. It just was the world doing what it does. And that beautiful sunset splashed across the sky. The trembling blue-green of the sky. The moon, one moon replaced by the new moon replaced by the full moon, whatever it is, right? All those things in nature that nature can do so effortlessly, that's our curse, that we have to labor so long and so hard
That's
to
our
achieve
standard.
that effect. And that's our standard. We measure ourselves up against that.
Against nature. That what we do as artists, what we do artfully, artificially, what we create in our human
With our artifice, yeah.
tries to measure up to that natural standard of beauty. We'll talk more about that juxtaposition of artful language or artificial language and natural language in our discussion. Alana, thanks so much for joining. I hope this was interesting for you, and I hope it was interesting for our students. I hope we'll see you again as the semester rolls along.
Hope so.
Thanks.
What was that?
I think that was great.
I actually understood more about the poem than